Good, LA Tech for Good, and our MDS. As a side note, there will be an exciting panel today after this keynote session on tips for writing an effective AI and deep learning book starting at 4 to 5:30, so feel free to check that out. Please also ensure that you are logged into WOVA to get the complete experience of this conference, such as interacting with our sponsors, attendees, speakers, and more importantly, be a part of the conversation of what's hot in the data world. If you are having any issues or concerns, please don't hesitate to email helpdesk@dataconla.com. That's helpdesk in one word at dataconla.com. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our keynote speakers, starting with Subash DSouza. He's a data evangelist. He's a founder and organizer of DataCon LA, as well as the founder of Data for Good. Please welcome Subash.
Thank you, Dimas. I'm going to present a video, so please give me a second.
We can't hear you, Subash.
This is the 8th year we're doing this, and this year it almost now. Welcome all to DataCon LA, the largest data conference in the SoCal region. This is the 8th year we're doing this, and this year it almost never happened. The journey to this event has been difficult, if not tumultuous. We started prepping for this event back in February, thinking we would be hosting this event in August, with a wonderful partner USC, on campus and in person, networking with several of you. Unfortunately, as many of you know, the pandemic happened, and now we are doing this virtually. But what really matters is that we still have a conference and we still have our learnings to share and even network, albeit virtual. We're here because we believe this was important enough to share our love for data and our passion for what we do. This year, it has become all the more important in sharing what we do. Data has shown that it can help during this period of strife. Data can be used for good. So that is an important topic I want to share. Last year, we launched an organization looking to use data for social causes. This is an organization that I'm personally invested in, and it's called Data for Good. It is currently getting non-profit status, but that hasn't stopped us from moving forward. In fact, at tomorrow's keynote, where you will learn more about the projects that we're working on, we will share our journey with you and our path forward. We will share the wonderful advices we have gathered to make this happen. Lastly, I want to thank our DataCon LA committee members, especially Jermaine, Rich, Sanjeev, and Dimas. I also want to thank all of our DataCon volunteers for making this event occur. Thank you and welcome once again.
Thank you, Dimas. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Subash, for that. So next, this person has been a public sector chief information officer since 2002, serving at the state of Washington Department of Licensing and then King County, Washington, and currently as the LA County CIO. Please welcome William Kehoe.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And luckily, I don't have a video, so we'll see how it goes here. And I'm going to rely on you to tell me that you can see things all right. Does that look good?
Nothing so far.
How about now?
Yes, we can see that.
Oh, wow. It's always a stress on these technical difficulties here. All right, here we go. Here we go. Okay, so thanks for the introduction and for the opportunity to present today at DataCon LA. It's a real honor for me and for LA County. And I'm titling my presentation today, Unleashing the Power of Data in LA County. LA County is the largest county in the country. We collect enormous amounts of data, and we probably use a fraction of what we collect. And we're on a mission as part of our IT strategic goals and our business goals to utilize our data in powerful ways and to change the culture of our county and our departments to more of a culture of using data for decision making. So today I want to talk to you also about how we're seeing this shift, and I'm sure this isn't just unique to government, but in any organization, where we're moving away from quantity to quality service focus. And what I mean by that is that in government especially, we have been traditionally very operational, very transactional, and service focused. And our reporting has mainly been on inputs and the quantity of services that our constituents receive. We've, over time, the government ecosystem has been very siloed system and siloed data environments that don't interact or talk to each other. But in order to serve our residents in the best way possible, we need to change this culture, this paradigm, and continually assess, adjust, and transform the services we provide to continue to build healthy, thriving communities. And to make that shift, we need to change our mindset around data and the culture that we have from reporting inputs to evaluating outputs and really assessing the quality of the services we provide. And to do that, we need to unleash the power of data that we have and to use that power of data to make better decisions and to change the culture of our environment so that we can provide the best services possible. So understanding that data and analytics provides clear insights and understanding for better decision making is what creates successful organizations. And I think we intuitively know that. But some organizations like ours in LA County, we have a long way to go to get fully into that culture and that mindset so that we can make the right strategic and tactical decisions to continue to improve the services we provide the public. The movement from making decisions from inputs and siloed data sources and using our experience of our staff that have been at the county for a while and points of view to making strategic and tactical decisions using data and data analytics starts with leadership across our county, and the understanding that investing in and creating a business, technology, and organization foundation is essential to establishing a thriving organization that is data-driven and points to the future. This requires a leadership, mindset, culture, organizational, and staff skill set transformation that will be the differentiator, I believe, between successful organizations and organizations that become irrelevant, or in the case of government, we deliver less than acceptable services to the people we serve. In LA County, we have created a very dynamic data as a utility IT strategic goals. And the goal of this particular vision is that we want an environment, a data environment that is dynamic, that isn't stale, where data is accessible, that it flows freely and securely throughout the organization. Like I said, we have a tremendous amount of data in our data platforms that you can see on the top. We have probably over 1,000 different systems with different data DBMS types, and that data is usually kind of trapped, if you will, in these siloed data sets. And so what we're starting to do is extract that into our department data warehouses or data lake environments for department specific analysis and recording. And then we have enterprise data platforms like our information hub that I'll talk about. And then we also have the opportunity to put data into our open data platform for the public so that they can engage in their government and also create data and for civic tech and startups and other opportunities to better engage with their government. But you can see we have a variety of platforms. There's a lot of external data sources that come into the county, and we want to be very, very architecturally sound in how we're moving that data, where we're moving it, so that it's accessible and we can get to that culture of a data-driven organization. One of the real assets that we have in the county today is what we're calling our information hub. And this is very unique in government. We haven't seen a lot of governments that have moved to this type of a situation. I know there's a lot of need out there, but what this platform has done for us, it's integrated that siloed data that from our transactional legacy systems and provided our staff the ability to perform outcome analysis and research. And to do this, we built this information hub that integrates disparate data from health, social services, housing, and justice systems into a master data management platform under a common anonymized client identifier that is linked to the services that the client has received from the county. And this has been very powerful for us as we've continued to build this platform. We have 20 million linked clients in the platform. We continue to build and add data to increase our capacity to perform outcome-based service analytics related to homelessness, justice, and social services. For example, the platform has allowed us to determine the effectiveness of services after a client leaves incarceration and the percent of clients that recidivate back into the jail population and why. If they had mental health conditions, was treatment received and how effective was that treatment? If they were homeless, were they placed in housing? Was that effective in keeping them out of jail in the future? All outcome-based evaluations to assist in better care and services for the individual, really created by the power of this integrated platform and client data. And as we've experienced, this year has been very unique, and we made a lot of adjustments in the county to respond to the COVID crisis. We had to quickly put together teams and data models associated with these various public communication that we wanted to get out. Available hospital beds, obviously, was very important. Predictive models on new patient projections, critical in how we did that. And we wanted these to be accurate so that when we communicated to the public, we were giving accurate information. And then information on testing as a few of the examples. Now, this takes a collaboration of not just county data, but collaboration with our city partners as well, making sure we're on the same page, that we're sharing data and projecting that data and communicating that out to the public. And it starts with preparedness, went to continuity of operations, response, and within that, there was various models that we had to put together, various reporting and dashboards that had to be assembled very, very quickly. And we've learned a lot through this process. In many ways, we weren't prepared for it, but it is going to move us in that direction of really utilizing our data in the future to make better decisions and to communicate with our residents in a more powerful way. So we have learned a lot through the COVID crisis, and we'll continue to build on that. So thank you. That's my keynote for today. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Kehoe. I find it interesting that you're moving from the quality, from the quantity to quality, and appreciate how you influence the county to be more data-driven. So our next speaker is an associate professor at UCLA in the Department of Information Studies, where she serves as the co-founder and the co-director of the UCLA Center of Critical Internet Inquiry. Please welcome Dr. Safiya Noble.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I don't have a presentation. I thought it best to just in the short time that we have, maybe try to highlight some of the work of the center and also ways that people can engage with us and that we might collaborate in the future. So let me just say that I come to these conversations about data and information technology from the field of information studies. This is the field of kind of, if you're old school, you know it as the field of library and information science. This is the field that is thousands, indeed, years old, contending with issues of information and the ways in which knowledge is categorized, made accessible, and can serve various publics. And of course, that has been an ongoing struggle throughout history, who has access to knowledge and who has access to information. And so we have been thinking about these things in this field for a very, very long time before kind of the rush to fetishizing words like data. And of course, I'm thrilled to be a part of this conference, but I just find it important to sometimes, maybe this is the academic nerd in me, to pull back and take a long view and think about kind of the long arcs of how knowledge and information and data work in service of the public. And of course, I'm particularly concerned about these things as a public employee. I'm a professor at UCLA, and I'm concerned about the many ways in which the information landscape is changing. So I started thinking about more specifically the ways in which algorithms and artificial intelligence, and here I'm talking about narrow AI, not the kind of futuristic AI that Hollywood here right in our town likes to push out to the public. I'm talking about the sorting and the classification of information and in whose interest that is actually working. I started my own career thinking about, I spent my first career before I was an academic in marketing and advertising. And of course, that is all about targeted marketing, targeted messaging, consumer segmentation. And I'd spent a lot of time working in that field. And it was so interesting to then go back to academia and see that the way in which people were engaging with large-scale platforms was as if they were in some way kind of public goods and not really advertising platforms, indeed, that were wholly interested in segmenting consumers, classifying, and collecting as much data as possible about consumers. And so at the time that I was starting to do research in this area, there was just a deep love affair happening between academia and companies like Google and Facebook. And I was a bit suspicious of what it meant that the public was increasingly reliant upon something like a search engine, a large-scale advertising, global advertising company, and thinking about it, relating to it like a reliable, trusted, credible public library. And indeed, many people were thinking about, and still to this day, use Google like it is kind of a fact checker or a quick reference guide to the world. And of course, this is helpful if you're trying to figure out, for example, like I have been, where do I drop off my ballot in order to have it counted early? This is where, the web and a search engine can be helpful, of course, unless it's gamed and disinformation is put there and makes it to the first page, where it becomes confusing to figure out whether whether you're going to drop your ballot in, let's say, a partisan box that might disappear. So, there are lots of ways in which the public is really reliant upon search engines to even participate in democracy. And what I found over the past decade of kind of thinking about these things, thinking about the way in which different kinds of really important spheres of knowledge, but also ways in which vulnerable communities were really made more vulnerable by the kinds of data that's collected and the way in which they're misrepresented in a variety of different kinds of large-scale technical systems. And so I feel very fortunate to have landed finally at UCLA kind of for good, and to start building a center where, along with my collaborator, Professor Sarah Roberts, who some of you may know is kind of one of the foremost academic authorities on commercial content moderation. And these are, of course, workers who are hidden in the shadows of social media companies, who do the incredibly taxing emotionally and physiologically damaging work of adjudicating content and taking content down that shows up in social media platforms. These are people who screen, everything from beheadings and violence against people and creatures of the earth to having to discern whether something is racist propaganda or a call for genocide or other kinds of incredibly harmful material that moves through social media. So together, the two of us have really been able to, I think, stake out a bit of an outpost, let's say, in the field broadly of internet studies or information and society studies, where our colleagues at other large universities like Stanford and MIT and Harvard have been maybe served as the labs to provide justification for the expansion of the tech sector into many sectors of our lives. I think what we've tried to do is put the brakes on that and say, much is at stake when we think about the incredible datafication that is ensuing. I mean, I think, when I think about the past 50 years of the struggle for proper representation and fair representation of women and people of color in mass media institutions, right? Like Hollywood, in film and television, radio, music, all of the ways in which women and people of color have really struggled to have fair representation, fair wages, fair participation, to not be misrepresented and objectified in those spheres. We find that in this other kind of mass medium of the internet, there's a huge struggle here still that we must contend with. And I think what we are trying to do at UCLA in this particular center is think about the kinds of work that is going on in the world that really, I think, has not centered, more than ethics, has not centered concepts of justice and fairness and equity and harm. And so I think that as we're talking today about data, that I'd like to offer this kind of point of view into the conversation as a way for us to remember that, in even just listening to the previous speaker and thinking about all of the kind of data that's collected on Angelenos, to what degree do any of us have an ability to understand how we are read and understood by the city, by the county, by the state, by the federal government in these systems that come to represent us? And this is, the sphere of concern that I hold so close because, I was at a conference once and I heard, I think it was the director of the FBI say that in the eyes of the government, who we are is our data profile. That was just shocking to me to imagine that in the eyes of people who are able to collect data about us, who we are is all of our Google searches, all of our Facebook stalking. I know some of you have participated in that. I certainly never have. All of the moves that we make, the apps that are tracking us, the ways that we are passively ensnared in other people's photo posting. You know, I try to tell my students all the time, even if you delete Facebook or you think you're not participating in social media, other people will insert you into those systems. And so there are these kind of secondary and tertiary effects of data collection that are, quite frankly, impossible for us to know about as we're currently organized in terms of public policy. So maybe I'll leave it and just say that I think that it's incredible to think about what it was like 10 years ago when I first started my work. And it was almost impossible to get an audience where anyone was interested in thinking about ethics or harm or oppression. It was very, very difficult to interject these conversations because everyone would just have these kind of totalizing answers like, you know, coding is just math. And of course, what we know is that data systems are socio-technical systems. They're embedded in the societies where they operate, and they have incredible social, political, and economic impact and import. And so I just, I wanna just remind us as we're thinking about our work, what will the structures be? What will the policies be? What will the cultural use of these varying forms of data be in either enhancing our quality of life or exacerbating inequality? You know, the one key message I always try to remind people about from my book Algorithms of Oppression is that, you know, we have more data and technology than ever, but we also have more social, political, economic inequality and injustice to go with it. At the same time that we have seen an explosion of growth of digital technologies, we have also seen an explosion of growth in global inequality. And there is a relationship indeed between these phenomena. And I just want to invite us, as we're thinking about data and thinking about it in a local context, especially, to keep some of these ideas front of mind. And I'll leave it here and say thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Noble. It is a very noble thing that you do there, kind of fits your name. But I think you mentioned a little bit in the beginning that the field of library information science, I thought that was kind of interesting, that, you know, everything Google is basically a big library. But this is a good segue for our next speaker. She's one of the founding members of Google's cloud platform. She spent over 5 years at Google building the early partner ecosystem and launched the Global Partner Program. She holds an MNC and MBA degrees from University of British Columbia. Please welcome Rebecca Yi.
Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much for joining us on the Friday afternoon. So I'm gonna try to test, see if I have this working. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, awesome. So let me start presenting here. So first of all, thank you. I wanted to share almost 2 decades of my journey in the big data world, not just as an entrepreneur and building technology for data processing and analytics, but also from thousands of the conversations I had with the CIO, CTO, technology leaders. And what are the pain points we're still faced with today? Where do we come from? Where we're going? So this is just my personal journey. And I'm going to take you through this in a little bit. Let me see. Everybody can see? Okay.
Yes.
So I think many of the technology leaders understand we're not doing data for data's sake. And it is really the insights we wanted to glean from the big data. And the insights either help us to improve our top line, our bottom line, to grow the partnerships, to differentiate our business from others. But why for so long we're still not able to really get the insights right? And many of the CIO, CTO said, you know, we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in building these infrastructure and technology, and yet the value we're getting from the insights can't seem to justify the investment we're making. So this is a big question we thought about. how do you get that insights? What are the key ingredients you must have? And what are the things you must do well? So it's not a simple answer, but I'm trying to extrapolate into 3 dimensions here. One is we talked about data, breaking the data silos, aggregating data, and curating the data, catalyzing the data, but also more important, to make that data consumable. And the second area is really the pre-processing, the processing, the post-processing, and it's related to computation on your data. And now with the machine learning, and you have to develop the models and serve the models. So that is also a very daunting task. And third thing is, after you've done all that, right, you wanted the business and the analysts to benefit from it. So how do they run the queries? Hopefully it's easy, it's just SQL, or better yet, let's do drag and drop, point and click, have a visual way of slicing and dicing the data. So over the years, as Scalar, when I worked with my co-founder Vikram, who fortunately built the first version of the Exadata at Oracle, we start thinking, wow, this is a daunting task. How do we solve this? And we look at the landscape today, and really the modern conundrum forces us to think about this in a very isolated, in a very decoupled, and very fragmented fashion, right? The top of the sphere is the database and data management and data warehouse, where you can write a query, the data is already structured, so you're hoping you can slice and dice it. But today, with the 3 V's, the volume, the velocity, the variety of the data, you really have to continuously be doing the computation. So the bottom half of that sphere, you're writing Spark, Scala code, you're writing Java code, right? You're messing with many different highly parallelized and distributed processing of the data. Now, for the CIOs, they look at this. Okay, I need to have different programming language. I need to have different vendors to do my bottom half. I need to build a different team, the IT, the data engineers team. Then I have to allow my business analysts and database people, DBAs, to work on the top half. And oftentimes, many of the things got dropped or lost in translation. So we look at this 5.5 years ago, and we thought, is there a way to bridge the 2 worlds together and make this seamless, make this simple, make this highly, highly efficient when you have the big volume of data, the velocity of the data, and coming at you? So this was the question we were set out to do, to get addressed. Fast forward today, we wanted to introduce a concept. It's called a relational compute. The relational compute layer sits in the middle, and the goal of this is really to bridge the 2 worlds together, make it seamless, make it simple, make it highly, highly cost efficient for the businesses. So how do we do this, right? How do we bridge the database world with this continuous, highly parallelized computation? So Vikram, our co-founder, he also worked at Sun Microsystem for decades. We thought we must introduce a instruction set architecture, translate the simple SQLs into a highly parallelized processing instruction set architecture. So we do have to revamp everything and then break those silos and introduce this middle layer. So to that end, I have 2 slides to show you visually. This is in the spatial dimension and why this layer is so important to glue the 2 worlds together and make your life easier. And the next slide, I will introduce in the time dimension, how it happens over time. So I want to draw your attention is that now you have data lake, you have streaming data sources, You have the traditional data warehouses, and somehow we need to have a single access point and bring all of them together, go through the processing, develop a virtual data marts, and all the way to advanced analytics and even machine learning. So that middle layer I just showed you, called the relational compute, allow us to go through the processing, the data warehouse to advanced analytics in a continuous fashion. And on top, hopefully the user doesn't have to learn the new set of skills and language. So we're going to keep it as SQL for BI tools and other web interfaces. So that standardized approach shall remain. So this is how we thought about the problem, and we went after this. Now, if you think about it in this time dimension, what happens is that you have all these siloed data sources, right, in different formats, coming at different speed. On the top left, right, we talked about the 3V, and everybody here is very familiar with the data world. So as we go in this time dimension, you're looking at these different data sources, different structures, and how can I use just simple SQL and the Python, a combination of that, to go through this pre-processing and the processing, and to the end, to create a virtual data marts. Of course, you can also lay on top the machine learning side of things. So this is the time dimension we want to take. But the key point I want the users to think about is really to keep the SQL and Python as simple as possible for the users, and not to have to worry about the backend distributed processing, the data partitioning, the management, so on and so forth. We'll take care of that. So this is what Scala is about. So over the past 5.5 years, all the customers we worked with so far, they were able to see 10x improvement on the total cost of ownership and the 5x improvement for the developer productivity. So I know this is a pretty big promise, but I do believe we now understand the problems really well. We understand where we came from and why this is needed in order to get us to the future where we are able to deal with that problem with less programming language, with less technologies, with people and the different teams communicating on the same plane, on the same page. So these are the things that I wanted to pose a question for you to think about, but also shed some light how we perhaps have found a solution to get closer to that nirvana of big data journey. So with that, if this sounds interesting, please come to our booth and please check us out on the website and send us an email, and we'll go from there. Thank you, everyone, and I hope everyone have a great weekend.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was very insightful, and the way you share the ingredients to insights and the way you think of the problem, it's very fascinating. And yeah, visit they're one of our big sponsor, Xscaler. Visit their booth. The next speaker is a CEO and a co-founder of Percona. Peter is a co-author of High Performance MySQL Optimization, Backups, and Replication, one of the most popular books on MySQL performance. Please welcome Peter Zaitsev.
Unmute myself.
There you go.
Then we are trying to arrange this wonderful and very complicated transitioning, sharing the screen. Hope it works for me. Does it? Yes, yes. Okay, yes. Yeah, thank you for giving me this head signal. Well, we don't have a lot of time, so let me just jump straight to that. And it's wonderful to be in this group of speakers where everybody has so different perspective. Mine would be from their database engine guy, and also from somebody who has been really working a lot in the open source space in particular. right? I think for all attendees of this event, it's not surprise what we really see the data processing absolutely everywhere in all wakes of life. And I think what we also can see throughout their planet really, what I would call like a data inconsistency really correlates with prosperity and growth, right? I wouldn't say whatever that is a cause, or it is just what if people don't even have access to internet, right? There is not much data we have on them, and but reality is as this. Now, if you look at the open source in particular, I think you can see what the open source really dominates in what I would call a small data. These are results from a development survey from the Stack Overflow, and we can see what the vast majority of the technologies which folks prefer when they're working with transactional databases, building the new application, and so on and so forth. These are open source engine, right? These are the overall trend of the open source versus commercial based software from DB engines, and we can see what now for the last couple of decades, really the open source was on the rise again for transactional databases. But I think, and this is what has been puzzling for me, is what when it comes to their big data, that trend is not so certain. We have, of course, the open source ecosystem with Hadoop, Spark, but as well, we have those ecosystems which are very active and growing with Redshift, BigQuery, Snowflake, Vertica, right, which was mentioned by some of our speakers before, right, which are, pretty much pretty far from an open source space. And I think the difference becomes even more profound if you look at how those are valued in the market, right? If you see two of the large open source companies like Cloudera and Databricks, right, you can see what they together is about a tenth of what is Snowflake alone, right? And Snowflake is a wonderful company to look at here because their information about the Redshift or BigQuery is kind of included in the cloud services, right? So it's very hard to get the details in this case. Now, what problems do I have with proprietary software, and especially in this case? Well, for me, that goes in the direct cost, where proprietary software tends to be expensive, as well as vendor lock-in, which really comes to our same loss of choice of freedom, which comes with a higher cost over a long period of time. But that is not only the reason. And here I think it's very interesting to look at the perspective of what some of us may be coming from United States and a Western world, right? Where really, if you are a software engineer in United States, right, especially working in this fields of working with the data, that is pretty good living, and also for a company with rather significant cost. In this case, the cost of the tools or access to the data you have to pay for is not as high, right? In US, often we are very happy to pay a lot to get the developer productivity. Let's literally go to the other side of the world. This is the picture from a village in Madagascar, which I visited last year. And you can see that is a place where the GDP is about $500 per year, right? You would probably consider somebody making that amount in a week on the poor side in US, right? And if you look at these in similar society, and if you look at the innovation they need, including when it comes to the processing the data, they really need that on the lower cost, and that is, I believe, where the open source is absolutely essential. That also aligns with my own experience. You know, back in late 90s, I was starting my own company in Russia, right? And frankly, there was no money to buy Oracle, right, or stuff like that. You could either steal, right? And frankly, in Russia at that time, about 99% of software was pirated, right? Or you could use open source, which was my choice. What is interesting now with software as a service, database as a service software, you don't even have that choice of stealing, right? Because how the software is deployed. I think another, which is a very interesting aspect of where open source is valuable for many countries around the world is politics, right? We are concerned here in terms of privacy, but I think it's for many businesses that is not to the same extent is essential as it can be in some other countries where they tend to be concerned even of US government, NSA, wherever, having access to their systems, right, or and the information, or of access to the systems being blocked, right, because of sanctions or some other developments, which is again not a problem to the same extent in the open source. And of course, if you look at US, and as we talk about all those, you know, companies, all those countries which are maybe led by dictators and they don't respect the citizen and stuff like that. But in reality, as you come to those countries and you talk to those people, none of those would really have the same opinion, right? Or say, well, yes, you know what, we are kind of bad people. We need to be, you know, punished. They all believe they and want the access to the advanced technology to advance their well-being in a way they can. Now, switching back to the technology side, I have a great hope for their big data systems or an open source innovation as it comes with them. Some of that comes with this technology which is called Kubernetes, right, which really helps us to unify and democratize things among different clouds. And it is important because big data systems must be run at scale in many cases, right? It's not just you can deploy them on your laptop, right, or something. We also have the new generation of an open source project coming up, which have the performance, flexibility, some of a very cool feature, in some cases even more advanced than the proprietary alternative. If you look at, for example, 10 years ago, this big data initiatives outside of Hadoop ecosystem was pretty static, and I'm very pleased to see that. With that, I believe with those new technologies, new place, and with Kubernetes empowering that on the foundation level, we are really looking to get the database convenience coming to database as a service convenience is really coming enabled by open source technologies. At least that is my hope and my bet, if you will. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Peter. That was kind of a nice overview of the database, and thank you for sharing with us. And the next, but last but not least, we have Dr. Rankin, who has 2 doctorates, a PhD and LHD She is a Fulbright specialist for the U.S. Department of State, who has taught at University of Cambridge and other institutions regarding the best way to communicate data. Please welcome Dr. Rankin.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see that? Great.
Yes.
Well, we know that we put a lot of thought into communicating data and coming up with insights to share and coming up with effective data displays. But when we do share data, too often people look at it, they consider it, they understand it, but they're not necessarily driven to act upon it. And that's something that we want to change because we're sharing data to make a difference of some sort. Oh, my screen just went blank. Oh, it said screen sharing has stopped. Sorry about that. Let me try that one more time. There we go. Okay. Oh, it keeps going to a black screen instead of showing my slide. So I'll just keep this open. Do you know why that's happening?
You're probably on the very last slide.
Oh.
Yes.
There we go. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay. Well, when people are looking at data, when all of us are looking at data, we're primarily engaging part of the brain that's great for problem solving. It's great for analytical thinking, but we're not really engaging parts of the brain that cause us to really remember what we're looking at, really care about what we're looking at. And because of that, we're not very likely to act upon what we're looking at. But there are ways to get around this. And one of the big ways is we can integrate storytelling with our sharing of data, whether that's just a quick little one-sentence story that you can fit in a tweet, or whether it's in a paragraph, or whether it's in a presentation, because stories engage all different parts of the brain. And particularly emotional stories, they cause people to be more likely to care about what they're viewing, to remember it, to tell others about it, and to act upon it. And I'll give you an example of how this works. I'm going to take you to 2015. And right before the Syrian civil war, there were 22 million Syrians living in Syria. But once the civil war broke out, the United Nations identified 61% of them as requiring some form of humanitarian assistance. And we all saw data like this and images like this on the news. And many of us also learned that most of those people needing assistance were displaced out of their homes. 6 million were displaced within Syria out of their homes, and 5 million had actually fled the country and needed other countries to take them in, to offer them safety. But even though we all heard about this, the saddest thing really is that very little was being done to help the refugees. Donations were just barely trickling in to help them, and countries weren't increasing the number of refugees they were willing to take in onto their shores. Until one day a particular image and story hit the internet. And the image looked somewhat like this. I opted not to show you the real image because it's quite disturbing, but you probably remember it and you probably saw it. It looked just like this, except that lying on the shore was the deceased body of a 3-year-old boy in a little red shirt named Alan. And with this image, of course, came a story that Alan and his family actually qualified for entry into Canada, but a paperwork glitch had prevented them from going over where they had family there to receive them. And so Alan's family did what so many did in a desperate attempt to get to safety. They paid a large amount of money to get into an inflatable boat with way too many people, and they sunk at sea and perished. And this story hit the internet, and within 24 hours, there was a 750% increase in donations for the primary charity that was supporting the refugees. And Pope Francis spoke out about the need for countries to help, and France and Germany teamed up and called on the European Union to take in more refugees. The UK upped how many refugees it was taking to 20,000 more. Canada increased its number and also announced that it would immediately rework its paperwork policies so that what happened to Alan's family would not happen to others. Now, the data was necessary, right? Because if we only heard Alan's story, donations wouldn't have come in, countries wouldn't have acted, because it would seem like an isolated event. But when just the data was out there, even when it was displayed well, people weren't driven to act. It's the two together, the data evidence paired with the story, that are so effective. And a personal story, one person's story, is particularly effective because we as humans are wired to relate on a very personal level with others. And I want to show you how I take this concept of pairing those two together and I apply it when I'm sharing data. One topic that I speak on a lot, I speak a lot in education and academia and government. And so I therefore am showing equity data a lot because equity touches every topic within those realms. And one set of data that I often share relates to students in the US who are identified as being gifted. Now, we know that you are just as likely to be intellectually gifted, no matter your gender, race, ethnicity, or socioeconomic status. But sadly, thousands of children are being overlooked for a variety of reasons. They are gifted, but schools are not recognizing that they're gifted. And so I share this data to an audience of teachers. But if I just shared the data just like this, remember what happens. We're engaging that analytical part of our brains where we're not so likely to remember and care about and act on what we're viewing. So what I do first is I talk to them about Gail. And Gail grew up right here in California, and she had a tough upbringing. She was poor. Her brothers did not fare well. They got into gangs and both died from those lifestyles. And Gail was struggling a lot in school as well. She often butt heads with teachers. She was often hungry, and her teachers very frequently told her she was dumb. She was held back in first grade because she was told she was not intellectually or socially, emotionally ready for the second grade. And this is Gail today. This is Dr. Gail Thompson. You might have read some of her books. She's given me her blessing to share her story, which is very important. She is a tireless change maker. She is a tireless advocate for students being underserved in our communities and schools. She's written, oh gosh, I lost count, maybe 13, 16 books. She became a teacher, a high school teacher, and then ultimately a nationally endowed professor. She got her PhD. She did work in the Peace Corps, and she's pounding the pavement every day to make a difference in students' lives. And I ask my audience of teachers, who does Dr. Thompson attribute as being the one that made the change in her life to put her on this path to do what she does today? And my audience always tells me it was her teacher, and they're correct. It was her sixth grade teacher who recognized that Gail was not stupid. Gail was, in fact, highly, highly intellectually gifted. That teacher, noticing that Gail was gifted, was pivotal in Dr. Thompson becoming the woman she is today, who makes a difference in so many lives. Now, then I ask my audience, or then I share with my audience this data, and I point out Dr. Thompson's female, Dr. Thompson's Black, and at the time when she was a student, Dr. Thompson was poor. She represents these groups of students who are systematically being overlooked as gifted when they actually are incredibly intelligent. Now, if I only shared the story of Dr. Thompson, again, it seems like an isolated event. If I only shared the data, it's so forgettable. But by pairing the two together, that's where people really care and remember and are driven to act on what they're viewing, just like those donors and those countries were driven to act when they heard the story of Alan paired with the data surrounding the Syrian civil war. So I hope that whatever your data is, whatever your wonderful data displays are and your wonderful data insights are, I hope that you find those opportunities, even if it's just a sentence or two, to pair it with the faces behind the data, the stories behind the data that can humanize the data and make people more likely to care, remember, and act on what they're viewing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Rankin. That was a very captivating view on the way we should look at data and stories that comes along with that. Thank you for sharing. So this concluded our session keynote for today. Thank you for all of our keynote speakers as experts in your field for sharing your fascinating insights and perspectives. We are fortunate to have you as part of this event. Thank you for everyone for joining today's keynote session. Enjoy the rest of DataCon LA event. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.